You know, it's hard for me to believe, but my channel, Earnestly Eston, just turned 5 years old. So I was recently kind of going through my channel, just the content on my channel, and sort of reviewing what's there. And I thought it was kind of interesting, so I thought I'd kind of do a video about the content, update where the content is, as well as talk a bit about how the channel has changed my reading habits. So when I started this channel, I made a vow, and the vow was that the channel that I would run the channel would run me, that basically, my reading habits would continue. So the channel would reflect my reading habits. My reading habits wouldn't reflect the channel, if that makes sense. And so I've really tried to stick to that. But as it turns out, I think that the channel has changed the way that I read, and it's really deepened the way that I read. So I thought, it might be kind of interesting to chat a bit about that. So mostly on my channel, what I like to do mainly is book chats. So over the last 5 years, I've actually accumulated a chat library, a book library of video chats about 164 different books. So later in this video, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the specifics around that. But, for now, I kind of wanted to talk about just how I choose basically my reading habits, and so how I choose what I read and what order I read it in, and keeping a commonplace book and what's in my commonplace book and things like that. So what I read, basically it's really fun for me at the end of a year to pick out books to decide what I'm going to read for the following year. So for me, I have a fairly I wouldn't say rigid. Some years are more rigid than others. Reading plans. So I actually keep a list of books that I would like to read. For right now, I'm using Goodreads for that. And whenever I come across a book that sounds like something that I want to read, then I will add it to this list of want to read books in Goodreads. And so then at the end of each year, when I'm deciding what I'm going to read for the following year, I will typically pick about 20 books. That these are the books that I want to prioritize reading, because I really want to get to these 20 books, because I feel like I can usually, in any given year, I always read typically over 20 books. So if I just pick these 20, that's a doable goal of, these are books that I've been meaning to read that I didn't get read this year, but I want to get read next year for sure. And so these are the 20 that I want to read for sure. And then as time goes on, there's new releases, there's things I hear about, there's things I read about, and I will add them then to that year's. So right now I have a 2020 reading list, which is all those original books that I added at the end of 2019, and then it's books that I've come across that I think, well, if I have time this year, I'd like to get to that. So that's sort of how I pick what I'm going to read. And so in the order that I read, it depends. Different years, if you've seen my channel for very long, you've seen I've done it in different ways over the course of these last 5 years. This year, I'm really just letting the book speak to me. And so as I'm finishing up a book, I will have books, on my reading list that I have queued up to read, and so I will let the books, like, okay, if I'm reading this, but like right now I'm reading this book, The Secret Teachers of the Western World, and so when I finish this, I will put some thought into what would be a good book, that I have that would sort of like sync with this, maybe, or maybe it would fit with it somehow. It feels like it should be the next read. That's sort of how I'm approaching it now. In the past, I've done it all sorts of ways. I've done random drawings. I've just done a list, like I've created the order at the beginning of the year and followed that. So I've tried many different ways. But then I did want to spend some time talking about a commonplace book. So a commonplace book is really how I structure my video chats for the books. So a commonplace book is basically just a place that you go, if you don't know what it is, it's a place where you go to just jot down your ideas about a book. And if you don't do videos, so one thing I've noticed is this channel has really focused my reading. So when I'm reading, I have in mind that I'm going to do this to chat the book, and so it causes me, I think, to pay a little closer attention. But even if you don't do videos, I think a commonplace book is a great thing to keep. So this is sort of what mine looks like. I just use these composition books. They're very inexpensive. I think if you have someone that gifts you a nice blank book with a nice binding, that would be a Commonplace book would be a great use for that. But since no one's gifted me one of those nice books, I just use these composition books, and really each book really has about a page, and what I'll do is I'll jot down some basic information about the book, and that way it really focuses your reading. So then if you're not going to do a video but you're just going to keep a Commonplace book, when you finish a book you have to spend a little bit of time reflecting on that book, and I think that's a really important thing to do, and it really deepens the reading experience when you spend a little time when you finish just letting that book sit with you and process what that book meant to you, even if you didn't like it, why you didn't like it, because you can learn from the negative as well. So yeah, just some things that what I typically write. I typically, this is actually the one for the notes I wrote for you again, which is the most recent book chat that I've done. But basically what I'll do is in my Commonplace book, I will start out with the book itself and when it was published, because to me, when a book was published is interesting. Might not be for everybody, but for me it is, because to me that's when the book entered the world's consciousness. So if it was entered the world's consciousness in 1972 or whatever, I'll put jot that in my notes, like originally published 1972. I'll put the original language it was published in, and then if I read an English translation, who the translator was. If it's important, I'll mark which edition that I read, just to keep up really with what book and what version, what edition, what translation that I read, if that's appropriate. And then I'll add a little note about why I decided to read that book. So I'll put a note here because I won't remember this 10 years from now or 5 years from now. So I'll put a reason, like I heard it somewhere, I saw it on another booktuber's channel, I read it, I've been reading this particular author, it's the 6th of their novels I've read or whatever. I will put a note like that. And then I will put a description basically about what the book's about. This really varies by book because it depends on what the book is like. If it's a work of nonfiction, it might be a description sort of what the book's trying to do, what it's trying to teach me. If it's a fiction book, sometimes it's a description of the plot. Other times it's a description of the main characters. It's whatever I'm feeling was what the description of the book, really just what feels right to me to describe the book. If I were to go to one of my friends and I was going to start to describe this book in 5 minutes, what would I say? Would I talk about the characters? Would I talk about the plot? Would I talk about, the history? So that's sort of where I'm coming from with that. And then I'll put like I'll put notes about what the main themes were, or what the book, each book really even works with nonfiction. They're really trying to tell you something, I think, typically, right? And so I will let the book, what did I think the book was trying to tell me? Whether or not it was successful, this is not a review to me. It's my experience reading the book. So I'm not trying to decide whether the book was well written or not. I'm trying to decide, what did I hear the book telling me, So I'll jot that down in my Commonplace book. And I will then I'll put like notes like, how did I connect with the book? Did it relate to something else I've read? Like I'll try to connect it to things. I'll connect it to previous books I've read, maybe other books by this author. Sometimes different books connect with each other, and I'll look for those connections. While I'm reading the book, I'll actually be looking for those connections because I've gotten such in the habit of writing these down in my Commonplace book that my reading then, I'm actually, my mind already is forming these connections. So I think that's really, it really deepens the reading experience for me. And then did it relate to me personally somehow, like life experiences or, something that I have thought about, or did it deepen my understanding of some aspect of life or some aspect of in a situation. So I'll jot those kind of things down. You can also put, sometimes I will put quotes. Like in this particular case, I'll put where the quote, because I don't mark up my books. I very, very rarely do I actually write in the margins of the books. But what I'll do is I'll write down some of the key quotes, like what page numbers they were on in the book. These particular parts of the book that really I wanted to call out, either because of a quote or because of a passage that was meaningful to me or something like that. So I'll keep track of all of that in my Commonplace book. So it's really casual. This is actually a nonfiction. These are the notes I did for the Empires of the Silk Road book chat. Here's the Death in Venice notes. So they're not real neat, they're not real nice, but this is Last and First Men by Olaf Stapleton chat that I did. So, but I think it's just really good to keep this. And I've been keeping Commonplace books the whole 5 years that I've had the channel. And I just think that they're a great thing to do for a reader. So if you're not doing one, I highly recommend you start doing keeping a Commonplace book. I think you'll find it'll deepen your reading experience. So before I run out of time, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different chats that I've done. I'm just really thrilled that I have this. I love my library of book chats. It's my main focus of my channel. So I feel like I've created this library where each individual book has about usually 12 to 14 and a half minutes of chat about it, and I give that book a little bit of attention in these chats. And I've done 164 of them. I also do keep, in addition to the Commonplace book, in addition to Goodreads, where I keep my want-to-reads, I keep a spreadsheet. So I keep an old-fashioned spreadsheet that details the book, it's the year published, it's the author, it's the country of origin, country or language of origin, and it's the genre or the type. So I split it into fiction and nonfiction. There's a little argument about whether or not that's even appropriate. Fiction and nonfiction, books are books, basically, but I do divide it that way because that's a standard way to do it. And then sort of any kind of other notes like translators or subgenres or genres. And so I just thought it'd be kind of fun to run through some stats about the content. So I have 164 total book chats. Of those, 98 I consider to be fiction and 66 I consider to be nonfiction. Of the fiction, 38 of those I consider to be literary fiction, 27 are science fiction, and 15 were fantasy. I did include poetry as fiction, although it could consider to be nonfiction too. 3 poetry collections. But for nonfiction, the most chatted category for me, I love history, so the most chatted categories, by not a surprise, is 26 books that I classified as history. And among the history books, the subgenre there, I would had 13 that I consider to be considering ancient history. And then 8 books of philosophy. Sort of a surprise, I've actually chatted 5 essay collections, and I love essay collections. I would love to do more of those. So, time. I mentioned that I really like to take note of when a book was published. So, earlier than the 20th century, only 5 books I've chatted earlier than the 20th century. I've chatted 57 books from the 20th century, and no surprise, I've chatted 102 books from the 21st century. So the most read decade of the 20th century is the 1970s. I've chatted 10 books from the 1970s. The most read 21st century decade is the 2010s, the decade we're still in, and I've chatted 76 books in that decade. I did count the decades and the centuries by the calendar, so meaning the 2010s start in 2011 and they go to 2020, and the 20th century starts in 1901 and ends in 2000. I hate that too. It doesn't seem intuitive to me, but that's the way the calendar works, so that's the way I came up with these numbers. So just some other interesting things to me, at least, was the most read year of the 20th century was 1930. I've chatted 4 books published in 1930, and then the most read year so far in the 21st century is 2015, and I've chatted 16 books that were published in 2015. Also, that's the most year overall. 2015 is the publication year that I've done the most chats on. Okay, so the most chatted authors are Hermann Hesse. It's a tie between Hermann Hesse and Boris and Arkady Strugatsky. Hermann Hesse did literary fiction back in the earliest first half of the 20th century, and the Strugatsky brothers wrote science fiction in the Soviet era. So there's a tie. I've done 6 chats on the Strugatsky brothers and books, and 6 chats on Hermann Hesse's books. Most is not surprisingly the most read country and most chatted country is the United States, since that's where I'm from. The most read and chatted non-English speaking country is Germany, with 9 books originally published in Germany. The most read and chatted non-US country is actually the UK. Again, not a surprise, since they have a huge publishing industry and they speak English, which is my first language, obviously. And so the total non-US books I've chatted are 85. I've chatted 85 books from other places other than the U.S. So that's basically the update. I've almost stopped my channel several times just because it is kind of a bit of work to keep up with, but I'm really glad that I've kept it up, and I'm really happy about this library of 164 chats that I've done, and I hope to see that grow over the next year. So I have a cupcake here to celebrate, so I'm going to take a break now and have my cupcake. I'll have a chat coming up on the secret teachers of the Western world here fairly soon, so stay tuned for that. Take care. Bye.